They moved here for peace, but when the HOA crossed the line, they fought back. What they uncovered would bring the entire neighborhood to its knees. The morning sun filtered through the oak trees lining Meadowbrook Circle as Sarah Martinez knelt in her front yard, gently scratching behind the ears of her golden retriever, Max. The dog's tail wagged lazily as children walked past on their way to the school bus stop, several stopping to pet the friendly giant who had become the neighborhood's unofficial mascot. Sarah had moved to this pristine HOA community in Riverside Heights 18 months ago, seeking stability after her husband's deployment ended in tragedy. The $2,800 monthly mortgage stretched her Army widow's pension thin, but the promise of a family-friendly environment with maintained standards had seemed worth every penny. Max, a therapy dog she'd adopted after Jake's funeral, had been her lifeline through the darkest months of grief. The Riverside Heights Homeowners Association marketed itself as a premium community W. Here property values stayed strong and neighbors looked out for each other. The CC&Rs were extensive 4 to 7 pages of covenants, conditions, and restrictions, but Sarah had skimmed them before signing. Standard stuff: no loud music after 10 p.m., grass maintained between 2 and 3 inches, exterior paint colors from an approved palette. Nothing about pets beyond the usual no aggressive breeds clause. That's why the certified letter felt like a punch to the gut. Notice of violation and immediate compliance required. The header screamed in bold red letters. Sarah's hands trembled as she read the allegations. Violation of CC&R Section 12. 4B. Unauthorized animal habitat construction. Violation of CC&R Section 8.1c. Unapproved exterior modifications. Fine assessed $500. Daily penalties $50 until resolved. The letter was signed by Karen Blackwood, HOA board president. In her trademark purple ink dot, Sarah stared at her backyard through the kitchen window. Max's doghouse, a simple wooden structure Jake had built during his last leave, sat beneath the maple tree. She painted it sage green to match her shutters. There was no unauthorized habitat construction. It was a doghouse, and she hadn't made any exterior modifications beyond hanging a small wind chime Jake had given her for their anniversary. Her phone buzzed with a text from her neighbor. Mrs. Chen, saw Karen taking pictures of your yard yesterday with a clipboard. Thought you should know. The knot in Sarah's stomach tightened. By afternoon, 3 more neighbors had called. The violations weren't random. Karen Blackwood, who lived in the corner mansion with the perfectly manicured rose garden, had been methodically documenting every household on Meadowbrook Circle. The Johnsons got cited for a garden gnome. The Patel family faced fines for their children's sidewalk chalk art. The elderly Kowalskis were being charged daily penalties for a loose fence board they couldn't afford to fix on their fixed income. She's targeting everyone who moved in after the board election, whispered Tom Chan over the fence. Started right after her development company friend got that contract to manage property improvements for the HOA. Sarah researched Karen Blackwood online that night. Real estate investor. 3 properties in foreclosure proceedings. President of Riverside Heights HOA for 6 consecutive years. Despite the bylaws stating terms should be limited to 2 years. Her LinkedIn showed connections to Pinnacle Property Development, the same company that had been sending unsolicited cash offers to half the neighborhood. The pattern became clear when Sarah dug deeper into the HOA's financial records, which were supposed to be available to all homeowners. The documents were heavily redacted, but what she could see was alarming. Special assessments every 6 months, management fees that had tripled, and a reserve fund that had mysteriously depleted from $340,000 to $23,000 in 2 years. Mrs. Martinez, the voice belonged to a teenager holding a manila envelope. I'm supposed to give this to you directly. Inside was a cease and desist letter from Blackwood and Associates Legal Services, Karen's husband's law firm. The accusations were shocking. Harassment of board members, destruction of HOA property, and intimidation of neighbors. None of it was true, but the letter demanded Sarah remove Max from the premises within 72 hours or face immediate legal action. Your continued violations demonstrate a pattern of deliberate defiance. The letter read, the board has determined that your animal poses a threat to community safety and property values. Failure to comply will result in a lien against your property and possible foreclosure proceedings. Sarah's vision blurred. Jake had rescued Max from a shelter overseas, nursing the injured pup back to health during long nights on base. When Jake didn't come home, Max became her anchor. The dog slept beside her bed, accompanied her to grief counseling, and somehow knew exactly when she needed his gentle presence. She called the phone number at the bottom of the legal notice. Blackwood and Associates, this is Karen, Mrs. Blackwood. This is Sarah Martinez. I received your letter about Max, and I need to understand. The violation is clear, Mrs. Martinez. Section 12.4b specifically prohibits unauthorized animal habitat construction. Your structure exceeds the permitted dimensions by 18 inches. It's a doghouse. My husband built it before he died. I'm sorry for your loss. But grief doesn't exempt you from community standards. The board has also received multiple complaints about your animal's aggressive behavior. Max has never hurt anyone. He's a certified therapy dog. That certification isn't recognized under HOA guidelines. You have 48 hours remaining. The line went dead. Sarah sat on her kitchen floor, Max's warm body pressed against her side. Through the window, she could see Karen Blackwood standing in her driveway, talking on her phone while staring directly at Sarah's house. Karen raised her hand in a mocking wave. That night, Sarah found Jake's old legal documents in the basement storage boxes, his military service records, their marriage certificate, the original deed to the house, and buried beneath everything else, a folder labeled HOA research in Jake's handwriting. Inside were printouts of property records, city council meeting minutes, and a handwritten note. Karen Blackwood, check county records for conflict of interest. Something not right about board elections. Sarah, if anything happens to me, don't let them take our home. Jake had been investigating the HOA before his deployment. Sarah's phone rang at 11:47 p.m. The caller ID showed her next-door neighbor's number. Sarah, you need to see this. Mrs. Chen's voice was shaking. I've been recording Karen for weeks. What she did to your dog. It's all here. The coffee shop on Main Street buzzed with the usual morning crowd, but Sarah felt exposed under the fluorescent lights as she waited for Mrs. Chen. Every passing car seemed to slow down. Every stranger's glance felt suspicious. In 18 hours, she'd gone from grieving military widow to neighborhood pariah, and she still didn't understand why. Mrs. Chen arrived clutching a small digital recorder and a manila folder thick with documents. I couldn't sleep after what I saw yesterday, she whispered, sliding into the booth across from Sarah. Karen Blackwood has been planning this for months. The recording was damning. Karen's voice was crystal clear as she spoke to someone on her cell phone. While standing in her driveway, the Martinez woman is perfect. Recent widow, limited income, emotional attachment to the property. If we can force her into foreclosure, Pinnacle can grab the lot for 60 cents on the dollar. No, the dog angle is just the excuse. Jim's law firm will handle the legal pressure. Once we get 3 more properties on Meadowbrook, the development rezoning becomes viable. Sarah's hands clenched around her coffee cup. She's been targeting me since I moved in, not just you. Mrs. Chen opened her folder, revealing photographs and property records. Look at this pattern. Every family that received violations in the past 6 months fits the same profile. Single parents, elderly couples on fixed incomes, or recent buyers with high mortgage payments. All on lots that border the green space behind Meadowbrook. The green space. Sarah had walked Max there every evening. A small wooded area that the home maintained as a community nature preserve. According to the city records Mrs. Chen had gathered, Pinnacle Property Development has submitted preliminary plans to convert that green space into high-density townhomes. If they could acquire the adjoining properties. Karen's husband represents Pinnacle, Mrs. Chen continued. But here's what she doesn't know. I found out. My daughter works for the county recorder's office. The board election where Karen got re-elected, half the votes were from properties that had already been foreclosed. Dead people voted for her. Sarah felt a spark of something she hadn't experienced since Jake's death. Hope mixed with righteous anger. Do we have proof? Better than proof. We have allies. Over the next 3 hours, a network emerged that Sarah never knew existed. Mrs. Chen had been quietly documenting HOA abuses for 2 years, building files on every suspicious vote, every questionable fine, every family that had been driven from their homes. The elderly Kowalskis had military legal experience from Mr. Kowalski's Navy service. The Patel family owned a small accounting firm and had been analyzing the HOA as suspect financial records. But it was Tom Johnson, the soft-spoken man from the end of the street, who delivered the most shocking revelation. I used to work construction. For Pinnacle, he admitted during an impromptu meeting in the Chen's garage, "Before I got injured and had to retire, Karen Blackwood isn't just connected to the company, she owns 30% of it. Her husband's law firm represents the HOA for free, because they're planning to make millions on this development." The conspiracy was bigger than anyone had imagined. The HOA violations weren't random harassment, they were a systematic campaign to force out homeowners and acquire their properties below market value. The constant special assessments were depleting the HOA's reserve fund to create a financial crisis that would justify selling the green space to Pinnacle. "How many families have they driven out?" Sarah asked. 17 in the past 2 years. Mrs. Chen replied, "All sold their houses for less than they paid. Pinnacle, or their shell companies, bought 12 of them." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop digging, or you'll lose more than your house. You have 24 hours. That evening, Sarah sat in her living room reviewing Jake's research notes while Max dozed at her feet. Her husband had uncovered the same patterns, the same connections. His final entry, dated 3 days before his deployment, was prophetic. HOA corruption runs deeper than violations. Check deed restrictions. Original developer may have included clauses that invalidate current board structure. The original deed. Sarah had seen references to it in Jake's notes, but hadn't understood the significance. She drove to the county courthouse the next morning, requesting every document related to the Riverside Heights development from its inception in 1987. What she found changed everything. The original developer, Riverside Heights LLC, had included specific language in the master deed that required all HOA board elections to be supervised by an independent third party. Any election held without proper oversight would be null and void, reverting governance to the original developer's designated successors, which, after several corporate acquisitions, now meant the homeowners themselves could dissolve the current board structure entirely. Karen Blackwood's 6-year reign was completely illegal. "This is massive," said David Park, the attorney Mrs. Chen had recommended. He specialized in HOA disputes and had been following the suspicious patterns at Riverside Heights for months. "If we can prove the elections were fraudulent, every decision they've made, every fine, every rule change, every contract becomes void." But Park's expression grew serious as he continued reading Jake's research. "There's something else here. Your husband was getting close to something big before his deployment. Look at these financial projections. The numbers were staggering. If Pinnacle's development plan succeeded, they stood to make over $40 million in profit. The shell companies connected to Karen Blackwood had already purchased nearly $8 million in properties around Riverside Heights." "Sarah," Park said quietly, "I think your husband's death might not have been the accident the military reported." The room went silent. Max lifted his head, sensing the tension. "Jake died in a training accident." Sarah whispered, "Equipment malfunction, according to this timeline. He was scheduled to testify as a witness in a federal investigation of HOA fraud schemes when he returned from deployment. The accident happened 3 days before he was supposed to give a deposition." Sarah's world tilted. The grief she carried, the assumption that Jake's death was a tragic accident, suddenly everything felt suspect. Her phone rang. Karen Blackwood's name appeared on the screen. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm calling to offer a solution to our little misunderstanding." "I'm listening." "Pinnacle Property Development would like to make you a cash offer for your home, 30% above current market value, closing into weeks. You keep your dog, we withdraw all violations, and you can start fresh somewhere else." The offer was generous, suspiciously generous. It would pay off her mortgage and leave her with enough money to buy a smaller place outright. But it would also mean abandoning the home Jake had chosen for their future, the last place he'd been happy. "I need time to think. You have until tomorrow night, Mrs. Martinez. After that, the legal proceedings continue, and the offer disappears. Your choice." That night, Sarah sat in Jake's workshop in the garage, surrounded by his tools and unfinished projects. Max lay beside her, his massive head resting on her lap. She could take the money and run, or she could fight for a principle that might cost her everything. She thought about the 17 families who had already been driven from their homes. The elderly Kowalskis facing bankruptcy over a fence board. The children who would lose their neighborhood if Pinnacle's development destroyed the green space. And she thought about Jake, who had died before he could expose the truth. Sarah picked up her phone and called David Park. "I want to file a lawsuit against Karen Blackwood, the HOA board, and Pinnacle Property Development." "Sarah, You need to understand the risks. They have unlimited legal resources. If we lose, you could face countersuit damages that would bankrupt you. Then we better not lose. The next morning, Sarah received a call from the county sheriff's office. A deputy was coming to serve her with papers for criminal trespassing and destruction of property. Karen Blackwood claimed Sarah had vandalized the HOA community center and threatened board members. As Sarah watched the patrol car pull into her driveway, she realized the gloves were finally off. Karen wasn't just trying to drive her away, she was trying to have her arrested. Max growled low in his throat, the first time Sarah had ever heard him make that sound. "It's okay, boy," she whispered, scratching behind his ears. "We're not going anywhere." The Riverside County Courthouse felt like a cathedral of justice as Sarah walked through its marble halls, but the butterflies in her stomach suggested otherwise. 3 months of preparation had led to this moment, a civil hearing that would determine whether Karen Blackwood's reign of terror would continue or crumble under the weight of evidence. David Park had warned her that courthouse politics could be unpredictable. Judge Margaret Hendricks was known for her no-nonsense approach to HOA disputes, but she had also never presided over a case involving allegations of fraud, conspiracy, and possible murder. "Remember," Park whispered as they took their seats, "today is about the HOA violations and fraudulent elections. We're saving the bigger revelations about Jake and the development conspiracy for the criminal referral." The opposing table was crowded with expensive suits. Karen Blackwood sat primly in a navy blazer, her silver hair perfectly styled. Looking every inch the concerned community leader, her husband Jim flanked her right side, leading a team of 3 attorneys from their law firm. To her left sat representatives from Pinnacle Property Development, including CEO Marcus Webb, a man whose LinkedIn profile showed connections to dozens of questionable real estate schemes across Southern California. All rise. The Honorable Judge Margaret Hendricks presiding. Judge Hendricks was a small woman with piercing gray eyes who commanded immediate respect. "This is a civil hearing regarding allegations of HOA mismanagement, fraudulent elections, and harassment of homeowners in the Riverside Heights community. Counselor Park, you may proceed with your opening statement." Park stood, his voice steady. "Despite the magnitude of the case, Your Honor, we will prove that the current HOA board has operated illegally for 6 years, systematically targeting vulnerable homeowners with fabricated violations to force property sales that benefit board members financially. The defendant, Karen Blackwood, has abused her position to orchestrate a conspiracy that has driven 17 families from their homes and embezzled over $300, zero from community funds." A murmur rippled through the gallery, which was packed with current and former Riverside Heights residents. Jim Blackwood rose for the defense. "Your Honor, these are desperate allegations from a grieving widow who refuses to follow reasonable community standards. Mrs. Martinez has consistently violated clearly established rules, and her emotional state has led her to construct elaborate conspiracy theories rather than simply comply with HOA requirements." The condescending tone made Sarah's jaw clench. She glanced at Max, who was waiting outside in Park's car, and drew strength from the thought of her loyal companion. "Let's start with the evidence," Judge Hendricks said briskly. Park's first witness was Mrs. Chen, who took the stand with quiet dignity under oath. She detailed 2 years of documenting Karen's harassment campaigns, presenting a timeline that showed clear patterns of targeting. "Can you describe what you observed on March 15th of this year?" Park asked. "I saw Karen Blackwood in Mrs. Martinez's backyard, measuring the doghouse with a tape measure while Sarah was at work. She was taking photographs and making notes on a clipboard." "Did Mrs. Martinez get permission for this entry onto her property?" "No. Karen used the back gate without permission. When I asked her about it later, she said board members had the right to inspect properties for violations." Jim Blackwood's cross-examination was aggressive. "Mrs. Chen, isn't it true that you have a personal grudge against the HOA because your own violations were upheld?" "I was fined for having the wrong shade of white paint on my mailbox post. The approved color was pearl white and mine was ivory white. They look identical." Scattered laughter from the gallery earned a sharp look from Judge Hendricks. The second witness was Tom Johnson, the former Pinnacle construction worker. His testimony was devastating. "I installed the original community mailboxes in 2018, he explained. "Karen Blackwood specifically requested that I document which families had mailbox colors that didn't match the updated standards she was implementing. She said it would give the board grounds for fines if they needed to pressure certain homeowners. Did she specify which homeowners, single parents, elderly couples, and recent buyers who seemed financially stretched? She had a list. Jim Blackwood objected repeatedly, but the evidence was too concrete to dismiss. The morning's bombshell came when Park called his surprise witness, Rebecca Torres, a former HOA board member who had resigned in protest 2 years earlier. I tried to raise concerns about the election process, Torres testified. Karen was using proxy votes from properties that were in foreclosure. Some of the voters had moved away years earlier, but their names stayed on the rolls. When I questioned it, I was threatened with legal action. What kind of threats? Karen's husband said they would sue me for defamation and interference with board governance. They said I could lose my house if I continued questioning their authority. The testimony painted a clear picture of intimidation and fraud, but Judge Hendricks seemed most interested in the financial evidence. Park's forensic accountant took the stand after lunch, presenting a detailed analysis of the HOA's books. The pattern is unmistakable. The accountant explained. Reserve funds were systematically transferred to accounts controlled by management companies, with direct ties to board members. Special assessments increased for 100% while maintenance standards decreased. The money was being funneled into shell corporations, but it was Karen Blackwood's own testimony that proved most damaging. Mrs. Blackwood, Park began his cross-examination. How many properties have you or your affiliated companies purchased in Riverside Heights in the past 3 years? I don't recall the exact number. Park handed her a stack of property records. Would these documents refresh your memory? 17 properties, purchased through various LLCs at an average of 35% below market value. Karen's composure finally cracked. Those were legitimate business transactions, including the Morrison family home, which you purchased 1 week after the whole placed a lien on their property for $12, zero in accumulated fines. I had nothing to do with that lien. You signed the violation notices personally, Mrs. Blackwood. Your signature is on every document. The courtroom was silent as Karen struggled to respond. Then came the moment that changed everything. Your Honor, Park announced, we have additional evidence that came to light just this morning. He produced a flash drive and a stack of emails. These are communications between Karen Blackwood and Marcus Webb of Pinnacle Property Development, discussing specific homeowners to target for violations. The emails explicitly reference using HOA authority to force property sales. Jim Blackwood shot to his feet. Objection. This evidence wasn't disclosed during discovery. Your Honor, these emails were sent to my client anonymously yesterday evening. We verified their authenticity through metadata analysis this morning. Judge Hendricks examined the documents. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. I'll allow it. Continue. Mr. Park, the emails were devastating. Karen's own words laid out. The entire conspiracy led me to accelerate timeline on Meadowbrook Circle properties. Military widow Martinez is getting too close to the truth. Jim thinks we can force criminal charges over the community center incident. We'll need to stage some damage. Once she's facing jail time, the property offer becomes more attractive. Another email, sent just 2 weeks earlier, confirmed 17 families relocated as planned. Green space rezoning should be approved by December. Estimated profit margin holding at $40 million. But the final revelation stopped everyone cold. Park held up a printed email dated 3 months before Jake Martinez's death. Web problem. With Army husband. He's requesting HOA financial records and asking questions about the development timeline. Legal says his scheduled testimony could expose the entire operation. Need permanent solution before he returns from deployment. The courtroom erupted. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face as the implication hit her. Silence. Judge Hendricks banged her gavel repeatedly. I'm calling a 1-hour recess. All parties will remain available. But before anyone could move, the federal agents entered the courtroom. Karen Blackwood, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and racketeering under the RICO Act. As the handcuffs clicked around Karen's wrists, she looked directly at Sarah with pure hatred. You have no idea what you've started, she hissed. Jim Blackwood was immediately surrounded by his legal team, but Marcus Webb bolted for the exit only to be intercepted by additional federal agents. Judge Hendricks looked stunned. Mr. Park, did you coordinate with federal law enforcement on this matter? No, Your Honor. This appears to be the result of an ongoing federal investigation. Sarah sat in shocked silence as the courtroom descended into chaos. The truth about Jake's death was now officially under federal investigation. But the revelation brought no relief, only the terrible confirmation that her husband had been murdered for trying to protect their community. As the courtroom cleared, Park put a steadying hand on Sarah's shoulder. "This isn't over," he said quietly, "but we just won more than a civil case. We might have just exposed one of the largest HOA fraud schemes in California history." Through the courthouse windows, Sarah could see news vans arriving in the parking lot. The story that had started with a simple doghouse violation was about to become national news. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Chen. "Max is watching the news coverage from my living room. He knows you won." 6 months later, Sarah Martinez stood in her front yard watching Max chase butterflies through the morning sunlight. The golden retriever moved with the easy confidence of a dog who'd never known fear, never been threatened with removal from his home. The doghouse Jake had built, the unauthorized animal habitat that had started everything, remained exactly where it belonged, now painted with a small brass plaque reading in memory of Staff Sergeant Jake Martinez, Truth Seeker. The morning news played through her kitchen window as she prepared coffee. Final sentencing in the Riverside Heights HOA fraud case that rocked Southern California's real estate industry. Former HOA President Karen Blackwood received a 12-year federal prison sentence for her role in what prosecutors called one of the most extensive property fraud schemes in state history. The legal aftermath had unfolded like dominoes. Karen Blackwood's conviction on 17 counts of fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering was just the beginning. Her husband Jim's law firm was under federal investigation, his license suspended pending criminal charges. Marcus Webb and Pinnacle Property Development faced a $68 million civil judgment and criminal prosecution in 3 states. But it was the revelation about Jake that had shattered and rebuilt Sarah's world simultaneously. The federal investigation had uncovered communications between Karen Blackwood and a military contractor who specialized in equipment maintenance on overseas bases. The brake failure on Jake's vehicle hadn't been an accident, it had been sabotage, orchestrated because Jake's planned testimony would have exposed the whole fraud scheme years earlier and prevented 17 families from losing their homes. Mrs. Martinez, David Park's voice interrupted her thoughts. The attorney had become more than legal counsel over the past months. He'd become a friend who understood that justice was sometimes more important than money. "I have news about the final settlement." Sarah invited him inside, where Max immediately commandeered his favorite spot on the couch between them. "The federal seizure of Pinnacle's assets has been finalized," Park explained, opening a thick folder. "After restitution to all affected families and legal fees, the remaining funds are being distributed to homeowners who were victims of the fraud scheme." The check he handed her was for $847,000. "This is too much," Sarah whispered. "It's what Jake would have wanted." The federal prosecutor said his research notes were instrumental in building the RICO case. Without his preliminary investigation, they might never have connected all the pieces. Sarah set the check aside without looking at it again. Money couldn't bring Jake back, couldn't erase the 17 families who'd been driven from their homes, couldn't undo the trauma of thinking her husband's death was a random accident. But it could ensure that Max would never be threatened again. "There's something else," Park continued with a slight smile. "Remember the deed research we did? The clause about the original developer?" Sarah nodded. Jake's discovery of the invalidated board elections had been crucial to the case. "Well, it turns out there's another clause we missed initially. According to the original 1987 development agreement, any homeowner who successfully challenges HOA authority through legal action automatically becomes exempt from all future HOA jurisdiction." Sarah blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means your property is no longer subject to HOA rules. At all. Ever. You can paint your house any color you want, build whatever you want in your yard, and no homeowners association can touch you." The irony was perfect. Karen Blackwood's attempt to drive Sarah away had instead liberated her completely from the very system Karen had used to terrorize the neighborhood. What about the other families? That's the beautiful part. The federal judgment includes a clause requiring the dissolution of the current HOA structure and the implementation of new elections, supervised by the county. Every family that was targeted gets automatic exemption from any future violations related to their cases. Sarah walked to her kitchen window, looking out at the backyard where Jake had spent his last weekend at home building Max's doghouse. The maple tree had grown taller in the 18 months since his death. its branches now providing perfect shade for the little wooden structure that had inadvertently exposed a criminal conspiracy. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed a familiar name. Mrs. Chen. Sarah, are you watching Channel 7? Sarah switched to the local news, where a reporter stood in front of the Riverside Heights Community Center. Dramatic transformation in this once troubled community. Property values have increased 23% since the federal intervention, and residents report a new sense of trust and cooperation under the reformed HOA structure. The camera panned to show families enjoying a community barbecue in the green space that Pinnacle had tried to destroy. Children played on new playground equipment funded by the federal restitution money. The elderly Kowalskis sat at a picnic table, Mr. Kowalski wearing a Navy veteran hat, laughing with Tom Johnson about something. They're calling it the Riverside Heights miracle. Mrs. Chen said over the phone, but we know the real story. One woman and her dog refused to give up. That afternoon, Sarah drove to the Riverside National Cemetery where Jake was buried. She brought Max, who had learned to lie quietly. Beside Jake's headstone during their regular visits, the brass marker was simple: Staff Sergeant Jacob Martinez, beloved husband, true seeker. We won, Jake, she whispered, placing fresh flowers beside the marker. But I wish you were here to see it. Max lifted his head, ears perked, as if hearing something Sarah couldn't detect. For just a moment, she could have sworn she felt Jake's presence, proud, relieved. And finally at peace. The drive home took them past the Riverside Heights entrance, where a new sign had replaced Karen Blackwood's pretentious monument to community standards. This one was simpler: Riverside Heights, a community built on trust and respect. As Sarah pulled into her driveway, she noticed a small crowd gathered in front of her house. Her first instinct was alarm. 18 months of legal warfare had made her wary of unexpected attention, but as she got closer, she realized the crowd was applauding. Mrs. Chen stood at the center, holding a wrapped package. Tom Johnson was there with his wife and kids, the Patel family, the Kowalskis, and a dozen other neighbors Sarah had fought alongside. What's all this? Sarah asked as Max bounded out of the car, tail wagging at the familiar faces. Open it, Mrs. Chen said, pressing the package into Sarah's hands. Inside was a brass plaque, beautifully engraved: Sarah Martinez, defender of our community. With gratitude from your neighbors, we wanted you to know, Tom Johnson said, that what you did, what you risked, it saved all of us. Mrs. Patel stepped forward with her young daughter. Priya wanted to say something. The little girl, maybe 8 years old, looked up at Sarah with serious eyes. Thank you for keeping Max safe and for making the mean lady go away. Sarah felt tears she'd been holding back for months finally break free. Not tears of grief this time, but of something she'd almost forgotten how to feel: hope. That evening, as the sun set behind the oak trees of Meadowbrook Circle, Sarah sat on her front porch with Max sprawled at her feet. The brass plaque from her neighbors hung beside her front door, catching the last rays of sunlight. Her phone buzzed with a text from David Park. Federal prosecutor wants to offer you a job. Apparently they need investigators who understand HOA fraud schemes. Interested? Sarah smiled, scratching behind Max's ears as she considered the offer. Jake had always said that sometimes the best way to honor the dead was to keep fighting for the living. She typed back, tell them I come with a partner. He's good at sniffing out trouble. As if understanding, Max lifted his head and let out a single, satisfied bark that echoed through the peaceful evening air of a neighborhood that had finally learned the difference between rules and justice. The doghouse Jake built still stood in the backyard, no longer a symbol of violation, but a monument to the truth that when good people refuse to surrender, even the most corrupt systems can be brought to their knees. Sarah Martinez had moved to Riverside Heights seeking peace after tragedy. Instead, she'd found something more valuable: the strength to fight for what's right, and the knowledge that sometimes the smallest acts of defiance can topple the mightiest walls of corruption. Max stretched out in the evening warmth, his tail thumping contentedly against the porch boards. He was home, safe, and loved exactly as Jake had always intended. And in the growing darkness of a California evening, that was enough. The end author's note: this story is fiction, but HOA fraud and abuse are unfortunately real issues affecting communities across America. If you're facing similar challenges, document everything, seek legal counsel, and remember that you have rights as a homeowner that no association can arbitrarily revoke.